Dear friends, welcome to yet another installment of Strategic Power. In this video, we are going to explain the intricate geopolitics involving Transnistria, a disputed region between Europe and Russia. With its predominantly Russian population, Transnistria faces political and economic challenges, while Moldova seeks to align itself with NATO. With the Russian occupation in southern Ukraine, a question persists. Is Transnistria close to annexation? Join us to understand the development of this tension. Before we begin, if you haven't already, consider subscribing and turning on notifications to stay updated on new videos. I wish to explain in detail Transnistria's role in global geopolitics, highlighting its relevance on the strategic board involving Europe and Russia, particularly in an already tense region like Ukraine. First of all, it is essential to understand Transnistria's geographical location. This narrow strip of land is situated between Moldova and Ukraine. A preliminary analysis focuses on the history of its formation. Since 1940, the region was under Soviet dominion, as part of the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. In the late 1980s, as the collapse of the Soviet Union loomed, internal movements emerged in Moldova and other satellite republics, yearning for total independence from Soviet domination. This context culminated in 1992 with Moldova's independence. However, part of the Transnistrian population, encouraged by the Russians, chose to maintain ties with Russia. Such divergence triggered a brief civil war in Moldovan territory between those seeking alignment with Europe and those preferring rapprochement with Russia. As a consequence, the local population proclaimed its independence from Moldova. It is pertinent to observe that this independence is questioned by supranational organizations and Europe, which do not recognize Transnistria as an independent state. Nevertheless, the region has its own institutions, including an army, government, and passport, enjoying considerable autonomy. To avoid possible reintegration with Moldova, the Russians sent 1,500 soldiers to ensure stability in the region, settling on the border with Moldova. Transnistria is considered autonomous, but for the international community, it remains Moldovan territory. It is important to highlight that its economy is entirely dependent on Moldova. It is of utmost importance to stress that Transnistria lacks access to the sea, having only land connections with Ukrainian territory and Moldova. With a population of approximately 500,000 people in this narrow strip of territory, its capital, Tiraspol, houses around 130,000 residents. Among the inhabitants, Moldovans and Ukrainians prevail, but the majority is of Russian origin. The predominant language in Transnistria is Russian, reflecting the historical inclination towards Russia. In exploring this region, it is noticeable that it remains stuck in time, still maintaining strong ties with the former Soviet Union. Once prosperous due to Soviet investments, many aspects of daily life in Transnistria hark back to the Soviet era, such as the presence of streets named in honor of prominent figures like Lenin and Stalin. It is relevant to highlight that Transnistria houses a vast Russian arsenal composed of more than 20,000 tons of armaments. It is speculated that an eventual explosion in this region could result in devastation comparable to that which occurred in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, evidencing its strategic importance for Russia. After the Russian invasion of Ukrainian territory adjacent to Transnistria, the Moldovans fear being the next targets, considering the considerable presence of Russians in the Transnistrian region who strongly identify with Russia. This situation has led Moldovans to economically hinder life in Transnistria, restricting its import and export activities. The situation resembles that observed in eastern Ukraine, where the population shares a similar narrative of identification with Russia. In light of this situation, the Moldovans have requested a seat in NATO. The current government demonstrates a pro-European inclination, intensifying its ties with the bloc. Despite Moldova's geopolitical neutrality, the prospect of joining NATO has raised concerns. In this context, the Transnistrian parliament recently voted for sanctions and requested support from Vladimir Putin, alleging difficulties caused by the lack of delivery of basic foodstuffs and restrictions on economic negotiations imposed by the Moldovans. Although the local president has shown some reserve regarding this positioning of the parliament, the Russian flag is fervently waved in the region. In Transnistrian households, it is common to see the Russian flag, reflecting a strong identification with Russian culture and politics. There is a scenario of increasing tension in the region, especially with the Russian occupation of southern Ukraine. If the war persists and the Russians advance on Odessa, this could put Transnistria at imminent risk of annexation, given its geographical proximity. An eventual occupation of Odessa would pave the way for Russian domination over Moldova, which is not a part of NATO. This strategic move could result in a comprehensive Russian annexation, including southern Ukraine, Transnistria and Moldova, situating itself adjacent to Romania, a NATO member. It is important to emphasize that geopolitics is a dynamic and constantly evolving field, especially when it comes to the actions of leaders like Vladimir Putin. The situation in the Transnistria region demonstrates the complexity of geopolitical relations, demanding a careful analysis of the dynamics at play. As tension mounts in the Transnistria region, the pieces of the geopolitical game between Europe and Russia move intensely. With Moldova seeking an alliance with NATO and the Russians consolidating their influence in Ukraine, an uncomfortable question arises. Are we on the brink of an imminent conflict, with catastrophic consequences for the entire region? Share your opinion in the comments below and stay updated with our detailed analyses.